I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Tuesday, the day after Christmas. It was a fun 3-day Christmas weekend. Dennis and I are here to recap all of the Week 16 action, and that includes starting with our show league. And you know what? It was a beautiful Christmas weekend for me and for the Bennett household. I barely slid by our friend Sloopy Lou in the semifinals. But Dennis, your wife, what a run she has been on.
She has been rolling, and she was sweating it a little bit because our friend John Hamler's had Christian McCaffrey and Brandon Ayuk going, but he needed Amari Cooper, Breece Hall level games from them, and
unfortunately, Brock Purdy forgot what team he was playing on for.
Well, it's like I told her, I said, I feel real good about your chances. We don't need to count our chickens before they hatched. By we meaning her. I said, but I'd feel a lot better, or I'd feel a lot worse if he had two guys like that and they weren't on the same team, or if he had two guys and one of them was the quarterback throwing them the ball. Now it turns out Purdy crapped the bed, so it didn't really matter. But when you've got McCaffrey and Ayuk both fighting for points there, the chances of the two of them teaming up for 70 or so points isn't great.
Yeah, I was somewhat hoping Christian McCaffrey would have like an 80-point game in him, because that would have been what I needed to make the final cut in Scott Fishbowl. My run ends in the semifinals, but it was a crazy game last night. It was a crazy weekend for games. A lot of upsets. Me making it into the finals in our show league almost salves the wounds that I encountered on my own Christmas Eve night. Just Denver, a one-game microcosm, down by a ton, fight all the way back, and then blow it in the end, I swear. But we will talk about all of the games. Some big movement this weekend, semifinals for fantasy, some interesting performances, and that started on Saturday, the first of our 3 straight days of football. Pittsburgh Steelers hosted the Cincinnati Bengals and got the 34-11 win, puts both teams at 8-7. The Bengals are 8-2 outside of the division, 0-5 in the AFC North. Dennis, this really hurt Cincinnati's chances of coming back into the playoffs. Do you think they have enough magic left these last 2 weeks?
They're not mathematically eliminated, but I think we're seeing why Jake Browning, hasn't spent a lot of time on the field, and he's 27 years old. Can he be a good, serviceable backup in the NFL? It looks like it. But it's the team in general has some holes. Lou Anarumo has made chicken salad out of chicken feathers on that defense for years. And they've got some good players, but they can't give up big plays like they did against Pittsburgh. George Pickens just lighting them up for those 2 long touchdowns. But Browning, he completed almost 67% of his passes. He had an 7.97 yards per attempt. So it was reasonable numbers, but the interceptions were bad. And Mixon has been, he hasn't been good enough that you want to give him 20, 25 carries a game. he's getting the tough yards. And I think we've seen Mixon is on that Zeke Elliott arc. You know, you've had some good years and you've been very productive and you can carry the load. You know, last year in Dallas, we saw Zeke. He was a 2-yard grinder. He was going to get you some tough yards. He's going to pick up the block and pick up the blitz and, you know, catch a few passes, but not like he did earlier in his career. And I think we see some flashes from Mixon of the old days. But the reality is he's a 6th or 7th year guy now that's had a ton of carries. We see the difference in explosion between him and Chase Brown. And it's evident that while a reliable guy, he's not a guy that you can count on to get you across the line anymore. So they've got, you know, Jamar Chase missing time, T. Higgins playing pretty good. The tight ends, you know, they're tight end by committee, and they've got guys that keep stepping up. It's kind of like Seattle and their tight end committee. And so you see some of these guys making plays, and so there's reason to be hopeful in Cincinnati when Joe Burrow comes back. If Jamar Chase can be healthy, they're probably going to lose T. Higgins this offseason. But some of their young guys are flashing. If they let Higgins go, I think Boyd is also a free agent. It might make them more inclined to bring Boyd back because he's going to be cheaper. And I think he can be where Higgins has the ability to be a 1B, Boyd is a clear 2. He doesn't have that 1B type of ability. And I think he's going to be 29 years old or 28 years old after this season as well. So Cincinnati, can they still make it? They can. They're going to have some things break their way.
They have a brutal rest of the season schedule too. You know, I think to your point, if Higgins moves on, if they retain Boyd, we've seen Trenton Irwin do a couple of things this season when he stepped in for T. Higgins. So Hubbard not entirely.
Andre Iosivas as well has flashed a little bit. So they've developed some depth at the position.
Meanwhile, for Pittsburgh, Mason Rudolph gets his first start of the season, 290 yards. He did, you wondered if he was going to check it down. They did put some deep balls, 195 yards and 2 touchdowns for George Pickens, woke him up a little bit. Steelers are also 8-7. They're also a little bit of a long shot for the playoffs, but does Mason Rudolph maybe give them a better chance of winning here down the stretch?
So Rudolph, he came in this weekend and he played with a chip on his shoulder. And, because he was inactive all last year. He was the third quarterback, did not see the field this year. And we saw why. He going into last season, he wasn't going to be the guy. But at some point, I think we see some of these guys mature. And Rudolph has been in that system, even though they changed coordinators. He's been in Pittsburgh his entire career. And the opportunity, it's almost like with Easton Stick. They've been there all this time. They've had a little bit of playing time here or there, but they've had time to just be part of the team, if not to be the guy. And so when they get in there, the team is comfortable with them, both from the coaching and front office standpoint and from the other players. And so they know what their ability is. At Oklahoma State, Rudolph had James Washington as a wide receiver, and he was known for chucking it down the field. And him and Washington made all kinds of connections. I think Marcel Aitman was the other guy there with them. And so they were deep ball guys. He comes into the NFL and it didn't quite match up. I thought when he was playing games in Pittsburgh when Washington was there, I was really high on the connection with Rudolph getting a shot. I thought there may be a chance that him and Washington would rekindle that Oklahoma State connection, and they never did. No, he only threw 27 passes, 290 yards. I hate to be if you take away the big play, well, because they made the big plays, but the rest of he only threw for, on the other, 15 completions, he only threw for 100 yards. But it was really, if he can play consistent like that, not take shots when they're there, not make turnovers, let Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren carry the run game. What was it? Where did Freiermuth didn't play, So Washington only had one.
I think he played. He just didn't get any.
Yeah, so only one target to the tight end.
It was real low. It was a real bummer for those of us that were hoping for a nice Pat Freiermuth game.
So I like, 10.74 YPA, good running game, and the defense in Pittsburgh always plays pretty well. So he, my note I put in here said he certainly played like he don't give a flip.
Yep. Well, and maybe that's what they need to open it up a little. The other Saturday game was a very tight one. The Buffalo Bills get the 24-22 victory, puts them to 9-6, gives them a good shot at the playoffs. They've won 3 straight. Gabe Davis woke up 4 for 130 and a touchdown. But Dennis, I want to talk to you about Stephon Diggs, 5 for 29 tonight. He's had 9 straight games with less than 100 yards. It's starting to be more of a short-term blip. Is it time to moderate expectations?
So he's wide receiver 52 since week 10. Those are some crazy numbers. Gabe Davis is wide receiver 53 in that span. And Davis has 3 zeros in those games.
But Davis has always been the kind of boom or bust guy. For the last couple of years, Diggs has been really, steady. You can expect like 10 to 30 points at least. So
the thing with Diggs, though, is he's still getting the target volume. It just isn't converting. And then it's starting James Cook had 20 carries and Fournette had 5 carries. So they ran the ball 30 times total.
And still all the rushing touchdowns went to Josh Allen.
Yeah, and they only threw it 21 times. So if they're going to all of a sudden become this grinded out rushing team, because it wasn't like Cook was ripping off big chunks. He only had 70 yards. Buddy was getting yards when he needed to. I think there's worry from the standpoint of if you're winning as a team, you're going to want to keep trying to win. Diggs has just 1 touchdown in his last 6 games. 3 of his last 5 games have been below 10. He's been below 10 yards per catch. And the last 2 games, they've thrown the ball under 30 times. So in the first 13 games, they threw the ball 21 the first 13, they only threw it 21 or fewer twice. Everything else was in the high 20s to 40s. So if they're going to throw the ball less, then you're going to worry because Diggs, it feels like, listen to the media, listen to how it goes this week, because we could be in for a squeaky wheel game in the title game for Stephon Diggs. So what you spent on draft capital, it's going to be hard to sit him in the championship game. And if he's squawking in the press about, not getting the ball, you can bet that Josh Allen's going to want to try to rectify that.
Meanwhile, we talked about Jake Browning maybe proving that he'll be a quality backup. Easton Stick, a guy we hadn't seen much. Justin Herbert had been very durable. Another start this week, 23 of 33, 215 yards, does get 25 rushing yards and the rushing touchdown. What have you thought of Easton Stick?
This is kind of like what he was in college. He's a really good athlete, and he's been in the system for 5 years now, so he knows what's going on there. He's been around the team. The team, I think, has had confidence in him to be able to step in if necessary. He's going to be a free agent after this year, and it feels like he's earning the chance to become either Justin Herbert's unquestioned number 2. Is he going to be the new Chase Daniel? And I mean, it's great. It's great work if you can get it. Get behind a quarterback that, is an established star. And as long as you're not, pushing, trying to make too much money, you may be able to stay there for 10 years and just keep, maybe you might play 15 games over 10 years and keep racking up that bank account. But as a free agent next year and what he's showing, I think he may be getting some teams that come knocking at his door, seeing if he's, can he be a bridge guy? Is he, at 27 years old now, has he developed the NFL maturity to be able to maybe get a starting opportunity and see if he can do something with it? What was it? What Matt Shaw backed up Michael Vick for 5 years and then went to Houston and had a nice career in Houston before he went back to Atlanta as a backup. Can Easton Stick be one of those kind of guys where he goes and, has a 5 or 6 or 7 year starting career before fading back into the background?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of kind of backup guys or guys that getting a second opportunity that have played well enough in a murky quarterback landscape that we're going to see some movement, I think, this offseason.
It looks like there's a formula to it, though. If you're a guy that comes out that's relatively unheralded and you're the 3, not the 2, but the 3, so you're not pressed into action, and you can stick with the team for at least 3 to 4 or 5 years, a team that has some stability, then all of a sudden you get this shot 4 or 5 years in, and you're looking like, okay, this guy may be able to do it if we don't put too much on their shoulders. So I think if I'm like in dynasty leagues, I might start to go look around the league and see, well, if I've got space on my roster, who are these guys that have been with the same team that look like, maybe Easton Stick re-signs with the Chargers for 3 years. And I'm like, well, if I roster Justin Herbert, it might make sense for me to have him on my bench and just hold him just in case. Or Browning, if he re-signs in Cincinnati, to just hold him just in case, because you've got these guys that now are sitting there. They're not changing teams every 1 or 2 years and having to learn new systems and get the experience. So there may be something to that formula.
On to the Christmas Eve games, and the first up was the Atlanta Falcons hosting the Indianapolis Colts. Falcons got a big win for them, 29-10. Dennis, there was no Michael Pittman, and without him, the Colts offense struggling that entire AFC South. They were all going great guns. Now it's a race to see who actually wants to take that division. But what do you make of this Colts offense?
So Minshew had the 3rd lowest YPA of the season this year, 5.4. So without Pittman, he wasn't pushing the ball downfield. And, Alec Pierce can get the ball downfield. Josh Downs even can do some work downfield. This season, he's got a career low YPA of 6.6 yards. So historically, we've seen Minshew push the ball deeper. But he really struggled without Michael Pittman. Pittman is a guy that has worked hard to be good at all 3 levels. You can use him in the short area, intermediate, and at 6'5", he's good fighting for the ball down the field, a la Mike Evans. So it really shows that they don't have a 1B, and maybe that's where they need to look to improve.
Yeah, which is a bummer because I liked what we saw from Josh Downs earlier in the season, but not a lot from him or Pierce today. For the Falcons, they get 29 points on the board. They get a win back to 7-8. They still have a shot at their division or wild card. Was Taylor Heineke what they needed? Does he give them a better shot, you think?
Maybe, but I do think they're going to need to upgrade the quarterback position next year. I don't think, Heineke is like the antithesis of the Easton Stick. He bounced around a couple years here or there. He's been in the league. He's had some shots. He's had some good games. He's had some bad games, and I'd like to see them get. I'd like to see them get a better quarterback. But if they don't get a new head coach, I don't know that it matters. After 3 straight sub 100-yard rushing games, the Falcons went for 177 this week. And so if they're running the ball like that, it's kind of easy on the quarterback to be able to, make good decisions.
Yeah, still didn't get a whole lot of involvement for Pitts in London, although Pitts got a touchdown and does get some. Next up, Seattle traveled to Tennessee, got the 20-17 victory. Dennis, they're spreading it around 8 for 81 for Lockett, 6 for 61 for JSN, 4 for 56, and the touchdown for Metcalf. Colby Parkinson also catching a touchdown. Going into championship week, how are you feeling about these passing game assets for the Seahawks?
So it's really been a team that is very middle of the pack when it comes to passing. Geno hasn't been this phenomenal passing guy like he was last year. He's probably been closer to what he was early in his career than what he was last year. He's been okay, but he's missed some time. 64.6% completion rate. Metcalf is, where's he checking in? He is wide receiver 20 on the season. And I think that's a reflection of sort of where the quarterbacking has been, because it isn't like a few years ago. So Lockett is 31 and JSN is 46. So we saw Teddy Bridgewater in Carolina several years ago have a very middling season. He was like QB 21 on the year, but he supported 3 top 25 wide receivers. We're not getting that out of Geno. And whether that's because they've got the running game with Walker and Charbonnet, I don't know that that's it, but I feel like it's more that Geno just can't really support 2 or 3 guys at a super high level. So you've got a wide receiver 2, a wide receiver 3, and a wide receiver 4. That's good. Those players are all important at their points in fantasy, but we're not seeing it where, we'd love to see see Geno when you've got weapons like DK, Lockett, and JSN. We'd love to see some support like we've had with Higgins and Chase and who are the other guys I was just thinking of?
Waddle and Hill.
Yeah. Brown.
AJ Brown and Devonta Smith.
Yeah. So we'd love, but I just don't think we're going to be able to get that either out of Seattle or out of Geno.
Next up for Tennessee, we wondered if they might go a little bit of a youth move and start looking to the future, but since Will Levis was unable to go, we actually got to see Ryan Tannehill again, 18 and 26, 152 yards, runs for 37 on a couple of carries. Derrick Henry actually got the passing touchdown in the game. Who would have thought?
Gotta love that.
Ryan Tannehill, an interesting guy. We've talked about this quarterback market. What do you think happens with him in 2024?
So his contract expires. He's got 2 void years with $9.2 million. They're going to Levis and they're going to be looking elsewhere. I don't think they're bringing Tannehill. I think he's 37 or 38 years old now. I don't expect him to be back. He had a nondescript game this week, decent completion percentage, only 152 yards passing. The only guy you are excited to have started in the passing game was Chig Okonkwo. And let's face it, nobody started Chig Okonkwo this week. If he keeps playing, I think he's going to go somewhere where you could see him going to Houston and being a backup to someone like CJ Stroud, or going to Los Angeles and backing up Justin Herbert. He's going to be a backup somewhere if he decides to continue to play. We see Joe Flacco keep wanting to play. I don't know if it's just because Flacco's like, man, I can just make great money if I'm in the NFL.
He's still got it though too.
Yeah, Flacco's look great, but I guess taking the first 10, 12 weeks of the season off is good for you.
Next up, we had the Detroit Lions at the Minnesota Vikings. Very crucial game for both teams. Lions get the 30-24 victory and win the NFC North for the first time in 30 years. Has to feel good. Dennis, they get to 11 wins. They're one of 3 NFC teams now with 11 wins. How do you feel about your Lions as contenders?
One pride, baby. One pride. I feel awesome. I've endured a lot. I endured the first winless season with my Detroit Lions. I got to see generational talents like Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson come and go and literally just walk away when they were still two of the best players in the game. I just think that it's great. They're playing well. They need to be more consistent on defense, but the offense, Goff is playing good. I'm a little nervous because I think their last game of their last games in Minnesota. They're at home next week, I believe, but their last game's in Minnesota.
They're in Dallas next week.
Yeah, they're at Dallas.
They're at Dallas, and they were at Minnesota this week, so they finish at home.
Okay. So being on the road, I'm a little nervous. Micah Parsons wreaks havoc, and we know that playing on the road, even indoors, isn't an ideal situation for Jared Goff. Got a couple great cornerbacks out there in Dallas. So we'll see if, Amon-Ra can carve it up in the slot. It'll be fun to watch Jameson Williams on the outside with his speed. I'm nervous that Ben Johnson's going to be like, oh, the only way we can get Jameson open is these, at the line of scrimmage screen passes. No, you let that damn gazelle run. You have him, you make Deron Bland chase him every single snap. Make Deron Bland chase him. Bland cannot keep up. But we've got a good running game. We got a nice mixture of backs in Gibbs and Montgomery. Laporta and Amon-Ra is going to be a nice matchup in the middle. I'm nervous because Goff is a guy that if he gets pressure, he gets squirrely and he makes some mistakes. He's already had a game this year where I think he fumbled it 3 times. It's going to be a nerve-wracking watch this week, to say the least.
Meanwhile, the Vikings drop to 7-8 on the season. They end with a game against the Packers, which is really a loser leaves the playoff race game, and then they have the Lions. How much did this loss hurt the Vikings?
Yeah, I think it makes it an uphill climb for them. Detroit is going to – I feel like Detroit's going to be coming off a loss. What's their record? So they're going to be 11-5 at home, trying to get right for the playoffs because they've clinched the title. Dan Campbell doesn't strike me as a guy. So since they've clinched the division title, I don't think Campbell is going to sit his guys going into the playoffs for the first time. I think he's going to want to have them keep their edge, stay locked in. So I don't think we'll be sitting players. He just doesn't strike me as that kind of guy. And I think we've seen coaches like Tony Dungy had a propensity to do that, and it didn't seem to work very well in Indianapolis when he would sit them sit Peyton Manning in the last week of the season, and whatnot. So their ground game was abysmal this week after Ty Chandler coming in a week ago and lighting it up. He just didn't do well. Nick Mullins showed why he's a journeyman backup. 4 interceptions. Yeah, I get it. He put up 400 yards and a couple touchdowns, but he helped the Lions defense out considerably. So I think Mullins is kind of falling. He's going to be a guy some teams bringing in to compete, to maybe push. He's somebody I could see Tennessee bringing in to push Will Levis, somebody like that, where you feel comfortable if Levis doesn't pan out, you feel comfortable switching to Mullins. If Levis is shaky, you feel comfortable using Mullins to completely break Levis's confidence. That kind of approach teams often take with their young quarterbacks. Maybe Mullins stays and gets a shot in Minnesota. That could happen too.
Next up, the New York Jets hosted the Washington Commanders in a game that was surprisingly exciting. Ended up with a 30-28 Jets victory. Sam Howell, 6 of 22, less than 100 yards, 2 interceptions, get the hook for Jacoby Brissett, who brought the team back yet again. Do you think this is it for Howell for the season?
He's playing on an awful team, and they don't have their best running back was out. They were going against arguably the best or second best passing defense in the league. It was always going to be an uphill battle for Howell this week. Howell takes chances, and he isn't always the most accurate, but he'll try to force the ball in and make plays. Should he have made those throws that became interceptions? Maybe, maybe not. You want to show your guys you believe in them. You want to give them opportunities to make plays. And we've seen McLaurin and Dotson and Samuel and Logan Thomas, for that matter, be able to make plays against good defenses. I just think New York's passing defense, their defensive backs are just different. And Howell if you have a quarterback that's a risk taker by nature, which I think Howell is, that's not always a great matchup. I would think Howell's back in there because I think we know what we have with Brissett. Came in, he looked great, 10 of 13 for 100 yards. But we've also seen Brissett be gifted the job in New England and in Indianapolis and not be able to keep it. So, Brissett is your classic great guy you want as your backup to be able to come in if you need it. Going to be a good team guy, isn't going to make waves and rock the boat. I don't think Brissett is a long-term starter solution for anybody.
Yeah, but I think they may end up trying to start over. I guess it depends on what they're going to try to do. I think we both feel like Ron Rivera probably a little bit of a lame duck candidate there.
So, I mean, if Brissett starts the next two games and the Commanders win both of them, does that save Rivera's job?
No.
All right.
But
so let your young guy keep developing.
Meanwhile, for the Jets, Breece Hall, another great game. Israel Abanikanda getting in there kind of as the second guy. But I want to talk to you about Dalvin Cook. It was one of the bigger signings, preseason when it was going to be Aaron Rodgers and this veteran core running for a Super Bowl. What do you think happens with Dalvin Cook?
Somebody's got to be the new Melvin Gordon. Why not Dalvin Cook? I mean, he'll bounce around from team to team thinking he deserves more of a shot than he's getting. He'll have the occasional game where he gets 6 carries and looks great because he's averaging 5 or 6 yards a carry. But if he gets any volume, it's just not there anymore. I think Dalvin, to me, feels like he hasn't accepted the Zeke role. Like Zeke last year accepted, I'm only going to get X number. I don't get the same volume I used to. I don't get the same opportunity. My job is to make this team better by doing the things they ask me. I think if Dalvin had accepted that, he would have been in Minnesota this year, helping Minnesota do that. But he couldn't accept that. And he went to the Jets. I think he deluded himself a little bit into thinking that Breece isn't going to be ready to carry the load, and I'll get the opportunity to show them, hey, you need to keep me involved. And the fact of the matter is he just didn't. And you got guys like Michael Carter who were coming in as the 4-minute back. And when that was really what Dalvin, that was one of the things he excelled at in Minnesota. And then Breece Hall is just getting better and better and better and better and better. And Abanikanda's younger, cheaper, more explosive. As long as those little tiny hands of his can hold onto the ball, he's going to be the number 2 guy in New York.
Green Bay Packers traveled to Carolina and escaped with a 33-30 victory. Dennis, we finally see Aaron Jones getting a healthier. Wasn't on the injury report this week. Made him one of the few Packers skill position players in that position. 21 carries, 127 yards. Did not have a ton in the receiving game, but is this an encouraging sign for the fantasy championship week?
Cue the "it's a trap" memes. Aaron Jones is a good player, but I think it's a mirage. If he's the slightest bit dinged up, he isn't the player he once was. He's 29 years old, 28, 29, maybe even 30. When he's healthy, he's good. He just can't stay healthy anymore. And it's a brutal sport. You're getting hit a lot. And he's a 5'9", 207-pound guy. It isn't like he's one of these, Derrick Henry type behemoths. Not that anybody is, but I think that what we see is he's turned into a between the 20s back. When he's healthy, when they get close to the goal line, they want to take 235-pound A.J. Dillon and try to hammer it in, or let Jordan Love use his plus mobility and be on the move and run it or throw it. Where, in previous seasons, when they would get inside the 20, Jones was a great weapon because he's a great pass catcher and he has a nose for the end zone. And even with 21 carries this week, you just didn't see him getting that type of opportunity. Only had 3 targets, caught 1. So I have a team I wish I'd have started him on. I'd have probably won but I just wasn't at the point where I trusted that he was going to be able to, 1, get 24 opportunities, and 2, be productive with them at this point.
Meanwhile, Bryce Young, he's had a mediocre rookie season, but 23-36, 312 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, led a decent comeback with Carolina kind of rallying a little bit late. Is this an encouraging sign if you roster Young?
At this point, anything positive is encouraging. I actually just tried to trade for Bryce Young this weekend in a league where I don't have a ton of draft picks, and I'm trying to go into rebuild. And I thought I could maybe snake Young on a team that had decent quarterback situation. And he was trying to get – it's a 16-team super flex, and he was trying to get Ingram and Sutton off of me. And it wasn't – if I'd have been him, I wouldn't have accepted it either. But he's rolling on to the championship game, and I thought, let me see if I can get him the guys he wants and make it worth something to me. Didn't work. He called me out on it. He completed passes to 8 different receivers. For me, the issue is only one of those targets went to Jonathan Mingo. DJ Chark had 8 targets, and let's face it, DJ Chark isn't fantasy relevant. Thielen had
more like targets. A fantasy zombie. What was it? 6 for 98 and 2 touchdowns for no single person started him again.
Right. It was just brutal. Tommy Tremble, is he going to be the new guy at tight end? We thought it was going to be Hayden Hurst this year, and now
poor Hayden Hurst on IR with that awful concussion situation.
So, but Mingo, 1 target, 1 catch, 9 yards. I would have liked to have seen Mingo be, among the league leaders or team leaders in targets. And he's been up there in previous weeks. He just hasn't been converting his catch rate. And some of the reasons are that Young hasn't been throwing very highly catchable balls at him. But Mingo's catch rate is like 46 or 47% versus Thielen's, which is in the high 60s or low 70s. Now, the difference too is their ADOT's like 5 yards apart, with Mingo being significantly deeper. But yeah, if he's spreading the ball around to 8 different receivers, that means he's getting through his reads. 64% completion is a good enough percentage at this point in his rookie season. 8.67 yards per attempt. I think I'll take those from Bryce Young after what we've seen at the beginning of the season. The coaching situation in Carolina is definitely going to be one to watch and see, do they bring in a collection of offensive minds that really can put him in a good situation. I think the offensive line coach is going to be one to watch in Carolina and the moves they make with that offensive line, because he's a 5'10", 5'11", 195-pound quarterback that needs to have throwing lanes.
Next up, the Cleveland Browns battled the Houston Texans, got a 36-22 victory. Dennis, 11 for 265 and 2 touchdowns for Amari Cooper, 6 for 44 and a touchdown for David Njoku. Are you feeling pretty rock solid with them in the playoffs with Joe Flacco back there?
Cooper's kind of one of the most underrated wide receivers in fantasy. I think that moved him up to wide receiver 12 after that 50-point game. I think he's probably more of a wide receiver too. You can't count on those 50-pointers, but he was a beast out there. I'd be nervous based on his career. I'd be a little nervous rolling him out next week in the championship. but I think you've got to you've got to start him. Njoku is having a career year. He's tight end 6 on the season. He's got career highs in targets, catches, yards, touchdowns. With one more year left on Cooper's contract, 2 years left on Njoku's contract, I feel like Cooper's ready for a restructure. Add a year or two, still give him some good money. I hope Deshaun Watson is watching what Joe Flacco is doing and taking it in and saying, this is how you win with this team. You've got these weapons. Get these guys the ball. I don't know what's going to happen with Nick Chubb next year, how quick he'll come back, at what point he's going to be fully back. He's going to be a 28-year-old running back coming off a horrific knee injury. And I think that Jerome Ford is showing that he's a serviceable back. I'm not looking forward to a 3-headed monster of Chubb and Ford and Hunt next year, or a 3-headed monster of Chubb and Ford and Strong next year. But I don't know if Nick Chubb is going to be in a position to do anything about that. So you've got some guys, you're going in the right direction. Your offense or your defense is playing great, one of the best defenses in the league. Let's keep it rolling. We can make the playoffs.
Meanwhile, for Houston, Case Keenum did not have any magic, was not the answer. They slide to 8-7. How brutal was this loss for the Texans?
I mean, can you see my surprise, Kevin? What was his last name? Face from Home Alone. That's what Case Keenum was not the answer. Who'd have thought? Honestly, Cleveland was the better team, I think, by a decent margin. Houston is coming on and they're playing good. Getting C.J. Stroud back is going to be big for them. They have 2 winnable games left versus Tennessee and at Indianapolis. And if Houston wins those, they're going to be 10-7. And if they split them, they'll be 9-8. So they're in the playoff hunt after being just abysmal 2 years in a row. Everybody was questioning who is that dude, Nick Caserio, and
Caserio.
his method. And, he went out and he finally got his coach who got his quarterback. And they've brought in some guys that are buying into what they're trying to accomplish there in Houston. And as long as they can, getting Stroud back this big is going to be huge for their playoff push.
Next up, another AFC South team that's on the skids. Jacksonville Jaguars traveled to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, got the 30-12 loss. Jacksonville has lost 4 straight since being at one time tied for the best record in the AFC. Really struggling out there. The good news, Calvin Ridley 6 for 90 and a couple of touchdowns. Trevor Lawrence ends up giving way to CJ Beathard at some point in this game. How are you feeling about the Jaguars? Big, still 8-7 logjam on top, but none of those teams is looking in peak form right now.
They seem to be battling for the title of the weakest division champion with Tampa Bay right now. So it's not looking great. They're just barely hanging on. ETN has been terrible since the bye. He's RB23 over his last 7 weeks. Since the bye, he was RB2 the first 8 weeks. That swing is just crazy. Losing Christian Kirk was big. It was nice to see Calvin Ridley step up in this game without Zay Jones on the field. Evan Ingram is just – he's become a vacuum out there at the tight end position. 10 catches for 95 yards. Lawrence is he's banged up, and I think Beathard isn't the savior that they need. They need Lawrence to get on track. He didn't take the year 3 leap that we were hoping for. And many of us that roster Trevor Lawrence weren't looking for just a step forward. We were looking for a leap now, being a year removed from the Urban Meyer debacle. And it just hasn't happened. So Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens this offseason. Is it a case of Doug Peterson just being one of those coaches that the game has passed by?
I don't know about that. So when Trevor Lawrence came out, he was supposed to be one of these, can't miss generational prospects that you had to have the 101, especially in Superflex, to get him to change. I'm starting to feel like after watching this 3-year arc that he'll be a solid QB2, but he is not what people thought he was going to be. I don't know.
agree.
Yeah. Meanwhile, speaking of quarterbacks that were once former number 1 overall picks, Baker Mayfield has had a wild 2-year run, signed that 1-year deal with Tampa Bay. He's been pretty solid all season. They are peaking at the right time. A lot of talk about where he might end up next year. Do you think he'll get retained by the Buccaneers?
So it feels like Baker Mayfield has played his ass off to save Todd Bowles' job. And so if I'm Todd Bowles, I think Baker has earned an opportunity to be my quarterback. He's got the pedigree. Whether he deserved it or not is an argument for, Devy channels or whatnot. But Baker was the number 1 pick, and he didn't pan out in Cleveland, fizzled in Carolina, came in and won a game on 3 days' notice in LA, and he's played well in Tampa. Now, I get it. You've got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Rachaad White, and so you should be able to be productive even behind a subpar offensive line. But over the back half of the season, that offensive line is starting to come together. The defense is playing okay, if not spectacular. So I think that, the issue for me is, what does the team do in the offseason? Evans is a free agent. Are they gonna let the heartstrings get pulled and say, we want this Hall of Fame wide receiver to finish his career as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, and so we're gonna do whatever we can to make it work? Evans is gonna want to get paid. He's gonna be like, I am arguably the best, if not one of the best wide receivers to ever play the game. Nobody has ever had 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons, yada, yada, yada. So Evans will be able to make this case. It's going to come down to, does he want to stay in Tampa and to make it work? Godwin's got a year left. So, and I don't know how many other teams are going to be willing to take a shot on Baker Mayfield. I think we know who he is. He's not an elevator. He's a guy that if you've got decent talent, he's going to get something out of it, and he's going to take some chances. He's going to make some bonehead plays, but he's going to play hard and give you all he's got. Are you okay with that? Because that's what you're going to get.
Next up, the Chicago Bears hosted the Arizona Cardinals, got the 27-16 victory. Dennis, the Cardinals, are hanging in there, looking at a top 3 pick, but Kyler Murray keeps playing strong, 24-38, 230 yards, 2 touchdowns. Are you leaning more towards them building around him or drafting his replacement?
So to draft his replacement, they've got to be able to move him. And if they move him, they're going to have to eat a significant chunk of salary. And it comes down to whether or not they're willing to do that. Do you want to bring in a rookie quarterback that's going to have to start immediately to a team that's mediocre at best and be able to, put this guy out there to take a beating? James Conner's had a good year, and is he going to be the guy that you want? Is he going to be able to hold up? Conner's missed a couple games already this year. He's got a propensity to miss 2 to 4 games every year. How much are you going to build around him? Emari Demercado and Michael Carter have both flashed a little bit. Hollywood Brown has been an abject failure this year. Michael Wilson has looked good, but he can't, just like college, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. Dortch and Rondale, if you stack them on top of each other, they're still not as big as Trey McBride. And And McBride looks like the real deal. So are they going to build around Kyler? That's an awesome question. If they do, they're going to have to trade out of 2 or 3 where they're at. If they're at 2, they're going to have to find somebody that we can sit around and say, oh, well, I'm at 2, I'm trading out all we want. But if nobody's willing to come up,
defense, offensive line, best skill position player. If you're going to build, if you're not worried about quarterback, there are a lot of things you can get at 2. We saw how much of a difference it was for Houston to be able to take Will Anderson with the number 3 pick.
It was, but so see, Arizona currently has pick 2 and pick 16. So at 2, if you can't trade out, do you bypass the value of a quarterback there? Do you take Fashanu out of Penn State, the tackle? In the mock drafts I've been seeing, that not fantasy drafts, but regular drafts, it's been like pick 7 or 8 or 9 before a defensive player goes, and that player has been Kool-Aid McKinstry that's going first. So,
but you never know how it's going to change when you go through the path. Arizona has a lot of needs, not just quarterback. And, we've seen how much not having an offensive line has doused even competitive teams this year.
Yeah, but it comes down to, can they justify passing up the value? And if they can't trade back, now I could see, who is it?
Let's put it another way. Chicago traded back a couple times last year, and they went from, and I got it, that they wanted to keep Fields and they wanted to get some pieces. And, the first trade for DJ Moore helped some, but some of what they ended up with in the draft, I don't remember them having a very memorable draft. You can trade yourself back and screw yourself. You might as well just take franchise-changing players where you can.
Right. And so it's coming down to, so we've got teams like Atlanta at 10, New Orleans at 11, Las Vegas at 13, Minnesota at 15, even Pittsburgh at 17, Tennessee. I'd say they're probably going to ride with, Giants at 5, New England at 4. If any of those teams want to come up and get May or get Caleb Williams, I'd almost be willing to, quote unquote, lose the trade, especially if I'm moving back to 4 or 5, because there you're at 4 and 5, you're looking at Fashan. I got to look at his name to be able to pronounce it.
We still have some time before
I think Joe Alt at Notre Dame.
I still feel like mock drafts at this point in time, most people are just taking like these. They always tend to be more quarterback and skill position heavy than when you actually get to the actual NFL draft after teams started appreciating needs and you see some of the player movement. So I think there's a lot of options for Arizona if they like Kyler Murray. It's just still a question for me about whether I'm building around Kyler Murray. You're very correct. They have to find somebody willing to take him. I feel like in this market, though, there's more of a veteran nucleus team that's deep in the end of a draft, that if they thought they could get a quarterback that would help get them into the playoffs and competing, might make that move.
Yeah, and I think, too, that teams that are later, so if I'm in the back half of the first round and I need a quarterback, I may be willing to take that quarterback. So, let's say Tampa decides that would they rather have – they make the playoffs, would they rather have Kyler Murray or Baker Mayfield next year? That may be something for them to consider. I
still think like an Atlanta.
Yeah.
An Atlanta that is going to be pretty, no matter what, they're going to be more in the middle of the draft. They have a ton of good young pieces from a lot of drafts, but quarterback has been a suck situation.
So Atlanta's a great situation because right now they're at 10. And so with them, you're looking, would you rather reach a little bit for a McCarthy, a Penix, Jaden Daniels, or would you rather go with Murray or Fields. Now with Murray, the compensation for Murray is going to be on a sliding scale based on how much cap you ask Arizona to eat. If Atlanta eats a bunch of it, they're going to want more draft capital. If they don't, if Atlanta says no, Arizona, you're going to eat a bunch of it. So, rather than take your 2, we'll take your 16 or something. I don't know. Crazy stuff can happen. It'll be interesting to see.
Meanwhile, for Chicago, we finally saw the backfield we thought we were going to see all season. Their backfield's been a little bit of a nightmare, but Khalil Herbert, 20 carries, 112 yards, touchdown. Is this an encouraging sign for you?
So I spent all off season talking about, I felt Herbert was the guy, even though I felt that Foreman had earned an opportunity. It just felt like Herbert showed enough explosiveness and ability. Herbert isn't necessarily a third down back. He can catch the ball on dump offs and whatnot and be productive with them. But he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. I don't know if we're going to see Herbert be able to maintain this type of role. He's a 5'10", 209 guy, so he's got a adequate size. And he always seems to break off some big plays here and there. But the backfield was just crowded with Foreman and then bringing in Roschon Johnson. Johnson, I don't think, has performed at the level that, us fantasy guys had hoped. But if Foreman is active, I also don't know that Herbert gets 20 carries.
Next up, the Dallas Cowboys traveled to Miami. Dolphins get the 22-20 victory, second straight loss for the Cowboys. They had that emotional win over the Eagles. Now they are one game back again, sitting on 10 wins. They close with the Lions and then the Commanders. Do you feel like the Cowboys are going to be kind of locked into that top wild card slot again?
Yeah. So the Cowboys. So Philly's last 2 feel more winnable than Dallas's last 2. And for whatever that's worth, I think that gives Philly the edge. I think Dallas is good and is going to play well. If Detroit can pull off the upset in Dallas, and I do think Dallas is going to be favored in that game, I think it makes it difficult for Dallas to win the division. I do think they end up being a wild card. Does Philly have the tiebreaker over Dallas? Do you know off the top of your head?
Well, when they were tied going into this week, Dallas was actually the number 1 team. I think it's going to depend if Philly loses one to the Giants. So that would be a division loss. I think Dallas will end up with a better division record.
Yeah, I don't expect that to happen, but stranger things have happened. So
I don't know. After what we saw on Christmas Day, Philadelphia still doesn't look right. We will get to them in a little bit. For Miami, Jalen Waddle dealing with an ankle injury now. Unclear whether he'll be able to suit up. They got the Ravens this week and then the Bills. There is still a chance that they could end up a wild card rather than a division winner. How big is that injury for the Dolphins?
Well, whether they win the division or are a wild card, I don't think it isn't like they're playing for the bye. So I feel like,
they are playing for the bye. If they win on Sunday against the Ravens, they would not only lock up their division, but potentially be the number 1 seed.
Well, maybe I'm wrong.
They could go all the way. Their range of outcomes is all the way from the 1 seed to the 5 seed.
Okay. I like, as long as Tyreek Hill is healthy, don't get me wrong, Jalen Waddle is really, really good. But Tyreek Hill is just otherworldly in what he can do. His speed is Waddle is fast, and Tyreek Hill just is faster. And he's stronger. He's quicker. He's got better change of direction. all of these things that Waddle is good at, Hill is better at. And if I'm the Dolphins and I have to be without one of those two guys, I'd rather be without Waddle. But I think that being said, we saw Durham Smythe catch 5 passes for 56 yards. That doubled the tight end output on the season, I think, said he mockingly. They have weapons. Raheem Mostert is still playing well. He didn't get as much volume. And unfortunately for one of my losses, Devon Achane didn't get the volume either. I felt like this was a game where Mostert would be out early and or Achane would be the guy that kind of did the running all over him like James Cook, and that did not happen. They've got lots of weapons, and Mike McDaniel is showing himself to be a very good game planning coach, very creative. The team plays hard and inspired football for him. So the question was, let's see, should we worry about the Jalen Waddle injury? Yes, you always worry about losing somebody of his skill level. I think he's wide receiver 23 on the season, 25, somewhere in that range. And so, yeah, you worry about it. Can they overcome it? I think they can. They paid Cedric Wilson very well at the beginning of the free agent cycle a couple years ago. And then they drafted Waddle and brought in Tyreek Hill. And everybody's like, what the hell did you pay Cedric Wilson for? Well, you paid Cedric Wilson to step in situations like this. I don't think Robbie Anderson's the answer. They got one other cat. I can't. Braxton Berrios. He's there.
Chase Claypool.
Yeah, no, it's Braxton Berrios is who steps up there. But they've got some players. Their running game is second to none when it's clicking. It's right up there. You can say maybe San Francisco when it's clicking is better, but no, I think you worry because of how talented he is, but you expect that McDaniel is going to take care of business.
Next up, the Sunday night game. The Patriots went into Denver and got the 26-23 victory. Dennis Bailey-Zappi has looked pretty decent since he's taken over as a starter. We talked about a lot of teams, looking for guys. It feels like New England probably is going to try to get theirs in the draft. But what do you think about Zappi?
So is this a situation where Belichick's like, you know what? Since I'm leaving, I'm going to make sure you can't get Caleb Williams or Drake May, a la Lovie Smith in Houston a couple of years ago?
I don't know if they beat Buffalo this week, then they're really knocking themselves out, because I think they went from being a lock at the number 2 pick to, you said, all the way down to 4 now.
Yep. Let's see, where's Tankathon at? So yeah, they're number 4 right now. So, Zappi, he reminds me of guys like Derek Carr. His ceiling is QB 18 probably. He's going to be, if he keeps the job, can he be good, serviceable for super flex leagues? Yeah, he's a guy that, you want as if you have him as your QB2, you're trying to get somebody else so maybe you can play matchups at your QB2. So you definitely want to have 3 quarterbacks if he's your QB2. He doesn't have a great arm. I think there's been enough quarterbacks in the league show that you don't have to have a monster arm to be able to produce good numbers and fantasy numbers in the NFL. As long as Zappi makes good decisions. The real issue in New England is they just can't seem to put together wide receivers that can take things next level.
Although Devontae Parker torched Patrick Surtain twice, so
Parker flashes that every now and again. He just does, and Juju Smith-Schuster will pop up every 6 games as Neil be healthy enough for him to play, and he'll put up an 8 for 99 type of game. Pop Douglas pops off every now and again.
Depressing. Meanwhile, for Denver, they started 1-5, battled all the way back to get into the playoff race. This is a pretty brutal loss. The Raiders now kind of leapt ahead of them a little bit at 7, and they probably have a better playoff claim than even Denver at that mark. Both of those teams still alive in the AFC West, but this really felt like kind of the end of the Broncos playoff run to me. Do you feel the same?
They can battle a little bit. It's probably better for them to miss the playoffs and get a better pick. Not that 3 or 4 or 5 spots is gonna, I guess, in the middle of the draft is gonna change your world. Yeah. I'm probably more concerned with why are they unable to get Javonte Williams on track? Being without Cortland Sutton.
They don't have an offensive line.
Well, I guess they weren't without Sutton. They just didn't throw the ball to him.
No, Sutton got knocked out the second play of the game with a concussion.
Okay. Yeah, I saw one target here.
They went deep. He almost caught it, slammed his head on the ground. And then we were stuck with Jerry Jeudy, who was the second wide receiver in the NFL born without hands.
Well, Marvin Mims and Brandon Johnson seem to step up now.
Don't talk to me about Marvin Mims.
If
Bro fumbled into the end zone and gave the Patriots a touchdown.
Yeah, you get that sometimes with young guys. The it is not as bad. Was it Baltimore last night where the guy hit Philadelphia, where his own guy hit him and he fumbled a punt?
This one, he muffed the kickoff, tried to pick it up, and then muffed it and fumbled it right to.
So, do you feel like you're the Denver fan on the show here? Are we 2 weeks away from them actively trying to get out of the Russell Wilson business?
I mean, I guess they might. If it was me, I'd fire the GM. Well, I think he's done a horrendous job.
If you're getting out of the Russell Wilson business, I think that is a direct indictment of, is it Patton, the GM?
Yeah, I mean, he spent a lot of money getting Mike McGlinchey, who can't block. Jerry Jeudy exists, I guess. A lot of the big swings. They actually just released Kareem Jackson yesterday, so. But a lot of the big defensive contracts they did earlier in the year, Randy Gregory, it was just a waste of money. I think he's a horrendous general manager that's set them back in every possible way.
Well, if you're going to be bad at something, you might as well be bad at everything, right?
I guess. It just, I don't know. I don't think it's all Russell Wilson's problem. I have questioned a lot of times the play calling too, because you could say Russell Wilson doesn't deliver, but on like an average series, you call an ill-conceived screen pass dumped behind the line that gets negative yardage, and then a run in the middle where you have no blocking that gets negative yardage, and then it's 3rd and 14, and you send 2 receivers into the package because you can't block without it, and one of those receivers is Jerry Jeudy, so you really sent 1 receiver into the package, and they can't complete the pass, and it's, well, Russell didn't do anything. No, that's not all him. I mean, and we were watching on Sunday night. He had no time. He'd drop back and then they'd be right on him. The only plays that he was able to make, he had one really nice down the field that Mims managed to catch where he was able to roll out, run away, and throw. The one nice catch that Jerry Jeudy made was when Russell Wilson was able to roll out and give them some time, but a lot of times it's heartbreaking because those guys will just drop the ball too. When you finally get it out there, I don't think it's all Russell Wilson, and it'd be $39 million of a $39 million cap hit to get out of it. I don't know that you're finding somebody to trade him. I don't think he's the only problem.
Yeah, so indicative of your play calling lamentation here, Javonte Williams, 3 targets, 3 catches, -5 yards, a long of -1 yard.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of they've made a lot of comments about him throwing at or behind the line of scrimmage, but that seems to be the play design. They have a lot of these wide receiver screens or running
Right.
back screens, and they don't get anything, and then you're in this third and long, and they're like, make the miracle happen. No, you didn't make the miracle happen. You suck. That's good teams don't do that. Good teams want to be 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2, or better yet, make it on the first 2 downs.
Right.
And we just don't. It's a consummate struggle. Speaking of a consummate struggle, the first Monday game, I mean, it was fun for me. The Raiders getting the 20-14 win over the Kansas City Chiefs, despite the fact their quarterback did not complete a pass after the first quarter of the game. Yes, that is true. Dennis, for the Raiders, we've talked a little bit about neither of us think Josh Jacobs is likely to come back. 22 for 145 for Zamir White. Do you like what you see there?
I do. He's putting up good numbers. He's like a tiny-handed Gus Edwards. And he's great on early downs. He had just one target. Amir Abdullah only had one target. So it's not like they're throwing the ball to the running backs much. They only threw the ball 21 times. And heck, Zamir White carried the ball 22 times. So, they were able to get it done on the ground. And so one of the tough calls I had now I managed to make the finals in this league, but I had Josh Jacobs in one of my contract leagues. And I had no replacement, but I had room on my bench. So I went out and I picked up Trey Tucker and Justin Watson. And so, Tucker was more of a, wow, we had a blow-up game. Is there something there? Let me see. Watson was, he doesn't have a super high ceiling. And so I ended up starting Tucker. I thought, I feel like they're gonna be playing catch up. They weren't playing catch up, so I should have started Watson. I still won, but anyways, Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams. Adams just for whatever reason he'll have these games where he just can't seem to get the ball. And not that Aiden O'Connell is known for his precise passing. I don't know. When you got Zamir White grinding it out and you're keeping Kansas City off the field, which, now that I look at the time of possession numbers, Kansas City actually had almost 10 more minutes in time of possession than the Raiders. It just couldn't do anything with it. Isaiah Pacheco, 11 carries for 26 yards. Mahomes had 10 for 53. So
let's talk about Mahomes for a minute. 27-45 for 235 yards, TD, INT, QBR of just 31.6. Their receivers haven't been great, but he hasn't been great either, and he hasn't been great for fantasy. Is it time to moderate expectations?
So going into last week, let me find this here real quick. Going into last week, I was kind of chuckling to myself about our sort of where we were with Mahomes. He's having a terrible year. Going into last week, he was QB6. Coming out of this week, he's QB7. And so we're sitting here lamenting how bad Patrick Mahomes has been, and he's still a must start even in one quarterback leagues.
Oh, not terrible, but you have this expectation. I think people in their minds, the Mahomes is going to get you 40 to 50 passing touchdowns and 4,000 to 5,000 yards. He's been fine. He actually almost feels a little bit like what we got from Geno Smith last year. And if his name was Geno Smith, you'd still be thrilled about this production.
Right. It's so when you're as good as Patrick Mahomes and the bar is set so high, you're bound to miss it every now and again. Sometimes you're going to miss it for a game. Sometimes you're going to miss it for a season. Would it surprise me if this ends up being, his worst season in a 10-year span? It could easily be that. Kelsey hasn't performed up to snuff, and that's been his bailout, and it just hasn't been there. I think what they need to do is they need to really take a look at their receiving group. I think they have a building block in Rashee Rice, but they went from having Tyreek Hill to having Sky Moore, MVS, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Mecole Hardman, and then they went from that to a rookie and Rashee Rice and MVS and Justin Watson and Sky Moore. They just haven't invested in the position because Patrick always bails them out and Kelce always bails them out. They need now to take a look, and they made conscious decisions to go with late round picks as their offensive linemen. They're not investing heavily in the O-line. They're saying, look, we're going to bring in guys with X traits and we're going to develop them and we're going to spend late draft capital on them. And we're going to, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. So their defense has gotten better. So they're not having to blow. I mean, the fact is they could have won this game with 21 points. It isn't like they had to put up 45 to win it. And they have a lot of games like that where 20 to 23, 24 points is going to win the game for them now. But from a fantasy perspective, we're like, hey, I invested the 103 in Patrick Mahomes. I invested the 101 in Patrick Mahomes. I'm not paying for QB7 production here.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. They definitely gonna have to fight now. They haven't even won their division, and if they don't close strong, they could actually miss the playoffs, which is interesting. Speaking of wanting to close strong, the Philadelphia Eagles had the middle game coming off a 3-game losing streak. They hosted the Giants. This was a lot closer than I expected. They do hold on for the 33-25 victory, getting a 13-point fourth quarter to kind of help get that done. Then a second straight week, we saw Tyrod Taylor come in for Tommy DeVito. Is it time to give Tyrod a shot here for the Giants?
I mean, yeah, don't you love that 7 for 16 completion rate?
I mean, he seemed to do a little bit better than Tommy Cutlets. At least he moved the ball down the field and got a touchdown.
Yeah, Darius Slayton made that play. We've seen Slayton make plays like that for Tommy Cutlets too. So, I mean, in a nutshell, I feel like Taylor is the safer play just because as a veteran, he's got more reps and he's going to do more things like throw the ball away to avoid a sack or throw the ball away to avoid an interception. But I don't think he's starter quality. I think he's a good veteran backup that he's not a guy you want to replace your starter that got injured in week 1 for the rest of the season. He's the guy you want to replace your starter that got injured in week 7 for 3 games. He's okay. I don't think his ceiling is terribly high. I think he's generally conservative in nature and what he does and how he plays. The fact that he threw an interception in this game, really is more of a, to me, that feels like an anomaly. I don't think he makes that kind of mistake often.
Meanwhile, the Eagles, they're 11-4, but they lost 3 straight. This one a little closer than expected. Do you think they're as good as their record?
They play as good as their record. They just don't play it consistently. Like, they have a really, really good team. I mean, Hurts is the QB2. Swift is the QB14. If Swift got just 4 or 5 of those touchdowns from Hurts, he would be like RB8 or something, RB7. Brown is wide receiver 4. Smith is wide receiver 13. And then Dallas Goedert's tight end 12 in points per game he's tight end 17 overall with 3 missed games. So Goddard has actually kind of been the odd man out a little bit. And I think part of that is when you got Kenneth Gainwell coming in and spelling DeAndre Swift and they're averaging, 5 to 7 yards per carry. I think that hurts Dallas Goedert. I mean, hell, Grant Calcaterra caught 2 passes for 21 yards. So they've got some decent depth. I just think that it's a narrow funnel team with Jones and Smith and then DeAndre Swift. And anything inside the 2-yard line is going to Jalen Hurts. I mean, they're 29-31 on the brotherly shove, something like that.
Yeah, you got to take advantage of it before they potentially outlaw it this offseason. In a battle of number 1 overall seeds, it was the Baltimore Ravens getting the 33-19 victory over the San Francisco 49ers. Dennis Lamar Jackson, 23 of 35, 252 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 45 yards on 7 carries. Do you think he is the front runner for NFL MVP right now?
Yeah, I think so. The hard part is that the MVP often is like the quarterback on the best team is what it seems to keep defaulting to, unless somebody has an otherworldly type of season. Like I could see if Tyreek actually hits 2,000 yards, I could see them going, okay, you're the MVP. You guys won.
Especially if Miami beats Baltimore next week.
Yeah. So, but Jackson's playing great. He's God, I didn't look up to see where he was on the season, but maybe I still have quarterbacks up here. He's QB4 on the season. His skill set is still very much a unicorn. We've got some running backs that can run or quarterbacks that can run the ball well. Justin Fields being an example. Jackson just is different in how he runs. He tends to avoid contact. He doesn't take on a lot of big shots. His ability to throw the ball, even now you see him getting out of the pocket and escaping pressure and still looking downfield. He's passing the ball better than he has in several years. He just kind of has put it all together, and he's been doing it now without his best weapon in Mark Andrews. So if we can start to see, we see flashes from Zay Flowers. Rashad Bateman's having some good games. OBJ is popping off. Isaiah Likely has stepped in. So it isn't like, the argument against Brock Purdy is, oh yeah, but he's got Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel. Who wouldn't be good? And the best offensive line in the league. Who wouldn't be good with all of that? Is the argument against Brock Purdy. Lamar doesn't seem to have quite that level of arsenal at his disposal, and he's led his team to the best record in the NFL right now, and they seem to be cruising in the AFC. Can you say, oh well, Kansas City's having a down year, so that's part of it, and yada yada? Yeah, all of those things are factors, but the reality of the situation is Lamar is exceptional at how he plays the quarterback position.
Meanwhile, one of those guys that was in contention, Brock Purdy, 18 of 32, 255 yards, no touchdowns, 4 massive interceptions. Worrying sign for Purdy, or just one of those days?
So 2 of the interceptions were batted passes, and him trying to make plays. I sometimes, you remember what my dad used to say. Sometimes you get the bear, sometimes the bear gets you. The bear got Purdy this week. Two interceptions were on passes that were batted. He got a lot of pressure. He was trying to make plays. Kittle and Ayuk both over 100 yards. How did Samuel? Oh, he didn't do much on the ground. Samuel had over 50 total yards. It was just sometimes you just have those games, and you just got to shake it off and move on to your next game. If there's anything to learn, San Francisco's defense put good pressure on Lamar Jackson. They didn't. Would they get 2 sacks? There was that one play where I think it was Cleveland Farrell came off the edge, or Chase Young came off the edge and had Lamar, and Lamar just escaped. And the things he is able to do from the pocket when he's getting pressure, other quarterbacks just can't do. Brock Purdy,
Brock Purdy's calling card is, I'm going to make the right decision and I'm going to make it quickly so that I don't, because, Purdy ran a 4.56 or a 4.66 at the combine. It's not like he's a slow guy. He's a good athlete. He's not going to run. He's not looking to run. He can run a little bit. He's not overly athletic, but he does have a little bit of pep in his step. But he's not Lamar Jackson. Sometimes it just happens. We've seen him be on the other end of it where, he's put up 5 touchdown passes. So I'm not going to get too much in a tizzy over Purdy having a bad game.
Well, that'll do it for week 16. It was a rough week for some of the Super Bowl contenders. But week 17 right around the corner, and that means our final Thursday night football game of the season. The 6-9 New York Jets at the 10-5 Cleveland Browns. That'll be Thursday night. I am taking the Browns to move to 11 wins.
So that's crazy, isn't it? The Browns with losing Nick Chubb.
They could end up being a 12-win team because I think both their last 2 games are pretty winnable.
It's crazy. I mean, the Jets are 14th overall in defense, and the Browns are 12th. The Browns are the number 1 pass defense, and the Jets are the number 2 pass defense. Browns are 10th in run defense. Jets are 24th.
You're saying a 45-42 game?
Yeah. I'm going to give this edge to the Browns. I'm picking the Browns as well. So the Jets are susceptible up the middle. Their outside corners are exceptional with DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner, and so you're going to have. If I'm the Browns, I'm going to have Cooper outside, and I'm going to have Tillman outside, and that's going to free up Elijah Moore in the slot and David Njoku in the middle. Jerome Ford isn't an exceptional talent, but I think him and Hunt are going to be able to be productive on the ground. I'm a little nervous about Breece Hall because he can be productive, and the Browns, are in the middle of the pack against the run. They don't give up a ton of receptions to backs, so that may level things out a little bit. It wouldn't surprise me to see Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah shadowing Breece Hall a little bit on passing plays just to help to neutralize him some. We saw that Hall can be an extremely productive running back in the passing game. I look for it to be a good game. Flacco was with the Jets. He knows what their defense is going to do. Elijah Moore was with the Jets. He knows what their defense is going to do. It wouldn't surprise me to see them move Amari Cooper into the slot either, and see if they can get Cooper matched up in the slot on a safety or a linebacker. So I like where the Browns are at. I like the way they're playing. They're playing hard. The Jets, it's been one of those years. Their defense is playing lights out. Trevor Siemian ain't the answer. Zach Wilson ain't the answer. Tim Boyle ain't the answer.
He's probably going to be Siemian again, though. They said it was a real long shot for Wilson to be ready to go for a Thursday night game.
Yeah. So I'm going Browns. I don't expect a ton of points either.
That'll do it for us today. We'll be back on Friday with a full Week 17 preview, championship week. So getting ready for that. But Dennis, if the people need to bide their time, the post-holiday hangover, what can they do?
So you should go to your favorite podcast platform. This one is actually a long episode, an hour and a half. We're usually right at the 1 hour mark. But download, give us download, listen, subscribe. We love all of that. Let's see. Mike Tomlin confirms they're going to stick with Mason Rudolph in Week 17.
Yeah, it was a longer episode. It's almost like the two of us don't have to work this week, and we're excited to have some free time.
We're giving our listeners a Christmas bonus.
Exactly.
50% more show.
Well, we will see you guys on Friday. Until then, have a wonderful week.